we'll be exploring the 5 theses. So we have a quite an impressive array of speakers today, and I'm going to give you some bios on who's who. And opening today, we have our main speaker is Alice McDermott. Alice is one of the leading writers of literary fiction in the United States. Her novels have won the National Book Award, the Prix Femina étrangère, and the Whiting Award. And at least 3 of her novels have been finalists for the Pulitzer Prize. So it's pretty impressive. We're so lucky to have her. Thank you, Alice, for being here. She's a native of Brooklyn, New York, and she attended Catholic schools on Long Island, graduated from SUNY Oswego, and received her MA from the University of New Hampshire. She is currently the Richard A. Maskey Professor of Humanities at Johns Hopkins University, and she lives in Bethesda with her family. Also joining us today, we have Liz McCloskey. She is a parishioner at Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Washington, D.C., where she is a spiritual director. She co-facilitates a feminist Bible study, and she is on the team of the Ignatian Spirituality Project, which is a nationwide ministry with formerly homeless people in recovery from addiction. Liz holds a PhD in theology and religious studies from the Catholic University of America, a Master's of Arts in Religion with a concentration in social ethics from the Yale Divinity School, and a bachelor's degree in religion and history from the College of William and Mary. She's a former columnist for Commonweal, and she also has published articles in the Washington Post, the Journal of Law, Medicine and Ethics, and other journals. We also have today Jeanne Hisle. Jeanne grew up in the Catholic Church in the suburbs of Philadelphia. She was educated by the Sisters of St. Joseph from first grade through high school, and by the De La Salle Christian Brothers in college, and at Catholic University for grad school. Jeanne has served the church professionally as a volunteer in liturgical music, high school ministry, CCD religious education, and fundraising. We also have joining us today Cindy Peña. She has been part of the 5 Theses from the start as well. She works to make the church relevant to people like her 2 adult daughters who don't see themselves as part of the church and no longer attend. Cindy's professional background is in journalism and public relations, where she is using to help bring attention to the 5 Theses. And in addition to our guest speakers, I'd like to introduce these 3 speakers who are members of the Women of the New Testament Ministry, which has organized today's event. Mary Dustin Lindinsky, known as Dusty, is the chair of the WNT ministry. Dusty was baptized by her namesake, Father John Dustin, a spiritual director to her mother and the pastor of St. Ignatius Church in the 1940s. In the Women of the New Testament ministry, Dusty found the support of other women who, like her, were trying to remain in the church in which they found doors to the divine, but a church that was also rife with sexual abuse, clericism, and misogyny. Through the WNT ministry, she has been learning to reclaim for women their rightful roles as disciples, apostles, and leaders in the church that Jesus founded. We also have joining us today, Toni Moore Duggan. She is a nurse practitioner here in Baltimore. She has extensive experience in the Archdiocese of Baltimore as the spiritual director and as co-chair of the Racial Justice Circle. Toni also served for many years as the chair of the cause of canonization of Mother Mary Lang. At St. Ignatius Church, where Toni is a parishioner, she chairs the racial justice subcommittees of the Justice and Peace Ministry. She and her extended family are known for their tireless work and deep love for the people of Baltimore. Finally, we have Anne Haddad. And Anne, thank you again for inviting me to be part of this today. Anne is a journalist whose career includes 10 years as a reporter for the Baltimore Sun. Her feature stories have appeared in magazines, including The Urbanite, The Baltimore, and Her Mind. As member of St. Ignatius, she has served on the Pastoral Council and has helped prepare a class of 18 teenagers for confirmation. Anne is on the planning committee for the Runners for Others, Ignatian 5K, which I participated in with my sons, the Women of the New Testament Ministry, and the Racial Advocacy Work Group at the parish. And Anne, this is very exciting. She's also working with a filmmaker on a documentary about the Rosary. And she asked for you to share, to contact her if you have a good Rosary story to share. So starting off today, we're going to have Dusty Ladinsky, who's going to begin today's event with the Magdalene's Blessing. And I think that will appear on the screen so you can see that as well.
And before I do, I want to say that in the first century Palestine of Jesus's time, women held a status just above that of a Gentile or a slave. But the four Gospels document that Jesus challenged the social norms relating to women. He conversed with the woman at the well in Samaria. He allowed a woman, at least temporarily, to abandon domestic duties to be instructed at his feet. On at least 2 occasions, he allowed women to unveil their heads in public, to use their hair to wash or anoint his feet. He invited women to travel with him and be his disciples, among whom Mary Magdalene is always mentioned first. These were radical departures from the norms of the day, a reformation that was repugnant to most, certainly to the religious leaders. How might the history of the church have been, and so how might the church be today, had Mary Magdalene continued to be accorded the esteem and leadership role that Jesus accorded her? Instead, throughout the history of the church up to today, she has been misidentified and conflated with a sinful woman who crashed a Pharisee's dinner party. The commemoration of St. Mary Magdalene was elevated to a feast day only in 2016. And looking forward to celebrating this coming Wednesday, let us imagine her and think about the example she sets for us. The Magdalene's Blessing. You hardly imagine standing here, everything you ever loved suddenly returned to you, looking you in the eye and calling your name. And now you do not know how to abide this hole in the center of your chest where a door slams shut and swings open at the same time, turning on the hinge of your aching and hopeful heart. I tell you, this is not a banishment from the garden. This is an invitation, a choice, a threshold, a gate. Is your life calling to you from a place you could never have dreamed, but now that you have glimpsed its edge, you cannot imagine choosing any other way. So let the tears come as anointing, as consecration, and then let them go. Let this blessing gather itself around you. Let it give you what you will need for this journey. You will not remember the words. They do not matter. All you need to remember is how it sounded when you stood in the place of death and heard the living call your name. And the dad will introduce our speaker again. Anne is a woman of the New Testament who said if Alice McDermott accepted our invitation to come today, she would move heaven and earth to make it happen. And so she has. Anne?
Hi, thank you. My name is Anne. So for many of you, Alice McDermott needs no introduction and is probably the reason that you are here today. Can anybody hear me? I'm not sure if I'm...
Yes.
Okay, great. So she has often said that she didn't think of herself as a Catholic author, and she's so much more than that. But if you find yourself pondering what it means to be a Catholic, I think that you would find a lot of answers in her latest novel, The Ninth Hour, which I think then surpassed Charming Billy as my favorite. Or if you well, also her characters are Catholic, but they find joy around them. Although if I can quote from the Ninth Hour, all joy was thin ice to Sister Lucy. Read the book, trust me. So if you want to ponder the mystery of why and how we love each other no matter what, then I think you'd find a lot of that in Charming Billy, which won the 1998 National Book Award in fiction. So in August of 2018, which is when I met Alice, the Pennsylvania grand jury report had just released its report saying that things are showing just how worse things were than we thought. It was earth-shattering to us. And so Alice stepped up along with Liz and Cindy and Jeanne and others who work with them to use their amazing skill and talent as writers, organizers, and women who have an amazing education in the church and in the world. So we hooked up with them, and we all met in November when the American bishops were meeting in Baltimore, and we joined a prayer walk from St. Vincent de Paul Church in Baltimore to the Basilica of the Assumption. And we posted the 5 Theses on the door of the Basilica. It was calling back to Martin Luther, but we actually called ahead to the Basilica to make sure that we wouldn't harm the door of this beautifully restored building. How Catholic is that, right? So the Basilica staff said to please just use tape instead of a nail, which we were happy to do. So with that, I then now ask Alice to begin her program.
Thank you, Anne. Can you hear me? I'm good?
Yes.
Great, great. Thank you, Anne, for that introduction. And thank you, Dusty, for that lovely poem. Just reading it and listening to it again reminds me of that beautiful moment in the Gospels that I suspect those of us with Catholic education didn't have highlighted as it should have been. And that is that moment when Jesus, Mary Magdalene thinks Jesus is the gardener when she's come to the tomb, and Jesus speaks her name. And she recognizes him for who he is. It's just the simple calling of Mary is one of the most glorious moments, certainly at the most glorious time in the Gospels. And I wonder how many of us, especially how many of us as girls and young women being educated in the church, were made to appreciate how lovely and loving that moment is, and how it is a woman who first was really the first disciple to the disciples, the first Christian, since she was the first person, the first human being to understand that the promises of Christ had actually happened and that he had been resurrected. I think thinking about that very much relates to my impulse back in August of 2018, when it was so clear to those of us who were trying to stay within the institutional church just what a challenge that was becoming. The Pennsylvania report came out, followed very quickly by the revelations about Cardinal McCarrick. I had met Cardinal McCarrick a number of times. The last time I saw him was up at Fordham University, where my youngest son was a student. And we were at a cocktail reception with Cardinal McCarrick, and he came over to say hello. Again, I had met him a few times before, and I introduced him to my then 20-year-old son, and they chatted amicably. And, motherly guilt. When Cardinal McCarrick walked away, I said to my son, now, there's a good priest. In June of 2018, I had to amend that misconception. So I was feeling rather dismayed, as I'm sure all of you recognize that emotion. I simply turned to my friends, most of them Catholic mothers, friends from St. Bartholomew's, where my 3 children had gone to school, from Gonzaga High School, where my 2 sons had gone. And I just sent out an email and said, I'm dismayed. Let's talk. Come to my house. I'm going to open a couple of bottles of wine, and let's just talk this out. I don't know that I wanted to be talked into staying in the church. I think I was quite willing to be talked out of staying with the institutional church. But I think it is that impulse that we all understand to reach out to our community. Understanding that we are the church, and that is the sustenance, not what comes from on high, but what we get from one another. And so I think in a kind of inchoate way, I sensed that and sent out an email and said, bring your friends, just come over. We had, I think it was about 18 of us gathered around my dining room table with snacks and wine. Again, many of us Catholic mothers who understood that the next generation, the generation we had raised, would not be staying with the institutional church. We talked. We ranted, you know. We talked about our hurt. We talked about our disappointment. We talked about our outrage, and eventually came around to what do we do? Who hears us? Does anyone understand our grief? Does anyone understand our pain? Does anyone understand our tremendous sense of loss when an institution that had meant so much to us, that we were so determined to pass on to our children and our grandchildren, had so betrayed us? Was there anyone there who heard? Eventually we, as you know, mothers, anyone who's been a Catholic mother, been a member of a mother's club in a Catholic institution knows the next thing is, okay, what are we going to do about this? What do we do? You know, how do we fix it? How do we get heard? So we knew that, we knew, thanks to Liz, who was up on such things, about the bishops' gathering. And we began to think, can we go to Baltimore and somehow make ourselves heard? And of course, you know, the eternal question that we knew we would get from the male hierarchy: what do you women want? So out of that meeting, we began to sort of formalize, okay, what do we want? And it was really Liz, I think, who had the theological wherewithal to be inspired by the 95 thesis. And I always say, you know, we're mothers, we're working women. We don't have time for 95 theses. We can fix it with 5. And through Liz's inspiration, and I'm going to pass it over to Liz now so she can talk about how these 5 theses were formulated.
Thanks, Alice, and thank you, Women of the New Testament from Baltimore. I think probably each of us had similar experiences of gathering with others and wondering what to do. And shortly after Alice's dining room table event, my church, Holy Trinity, had a retreat. And I know a lot of the churches at the time were having listening sessions, and Holy Trinity was among those churches doing that. And as I was listening at a very fruitful listening session there at Holy Trinity, I was thinking about this notion that we had discussed about going to Baltimore. And I did start to picture the church door and Martin Luther. And as I listened, there were recurring themes. And so the 5 theses really grew out of not that small table, not even just the Holy Trinity listening session, but the things that were being said across the country by different people about what this disruption meant for a church and how we might start to reform it. And so the theses were meant to really just distill what a lot of concerned Catholics were articulating in various places. And so we did sort of chisel those into these 5, which I might just read so that we know what we're talking about. The first thesis, full transparency. Release the names of clergy in every diocese found by internal processes to be abusers. Pledge to fully to cooperate without question and without qualification with all new and ongoing investigations initiated by attorneys general, local prosecutors, and any other law enforcement bodies, especially when evidence points to abuse by clerics and negligence by those with responsibility over them. The second, listening to survivors' voices. Create and publicize a permanent and prominent place in every issue of every diocesan newspaper in the country for survivors of clergy sexual abuse to share their stories. 3, simple living. As a symbolic gesture of the commitment to dismantle clericalism, shed the royal raiment and regalia of the episcopate, wearing instead the plain black garb and liturgical vestments of a parish priest, and spending time in service to the poor and marginalized for the coming liturgical year. 4, put women in church leadership. Ask Pope Francis to restore women to the ordained diaconate, to include women as voting members at meetings of the Synod of Bishops, to reopen the discussion of women's ordination, and to name women as cardinals at the next consistory and at every consistory going forward until a balance is achieved. And then 5, pray for a reformed church. Require every parish and every diocese to include this prayer, which I think will conclude our time together with, or one based on it, every Sunday in the prayers of the faithful during the next 3 liturgical years. And the prayer is for one of healing and inclusion and a new future for our church. So as you can see, the theses are actually directed to the bishops. And I'd say in my, I don't know if it's, I think it's naivete. I thought it was optimism. I actually thought, well, all we need, the bishops are obviously wanting to know what they can do in the face of this just crumbling church. And here are the ideas. So I really did think going to Baltimore, gathering some people about that was what it would take. And so it was energizing to go to Baltimore because we met a number of you, Women of the New Testament, and also a group in New York, the women who stayed at Xavier, another Jesuit parish, were doing the same thing at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and then a number of women and men from a Seattle Jesuit church, St. Joseph's, were doing the same thing at their cathedral, and I think a group in Chicago. So what was energizing is also what's energizing about this conversation today, which is connecting with women and men across the country in different parishes to stand behind these very simple, yet not simply achieved principles for reform. And I think what we can talk about today is going forward, this was sort of targeted very specifically to the bishops, and there's room now to go in broader directions than just the bishops. And I think I'll turn it to Jeanne and Cindy, who have been really instrumental in communicating what the theses are, gathering people around it, and proposing some action plans.
Jeanne, I think you were going to go next.
Yeah, I'm next. Sorry, I unmuted. I'm keeping muted because of the dogs, so let's hope they behave. So in order to reach the people, I mean, we had to go virtual, and we created a website. Never done that before, and you never know what the Holy Spirit guides you to do. So we put together a website, and it's I was looking at the metrics from last year. We had over 30, almost 4,000 hits, 4,000 visits to our website last year from 16 different countries. And this year and then we've even added a few more countries. So there's a worldwide interest in church change. And the website is really a touch point. So people can refer back to, we're trying to do action points, but it's something that we can guide people back to. It's not, for resource, if you want to read through, we'll put articles up, and there's a link to our podcast. So Cindy, I'm throwing that to you on the podcast.
Well, Jeanne, you've done a tremendous job, as Alice and Liz have as well, in really sort of setting the foundation for the 5 Theses and establishing a way forward and sort of a collection of next steps that we think are reasonable, logical, and doable for the Catholic Church, and things that lay people, lay Catholics can support. And as part of our wanting to get this out as far and wide as possible and share it with as many people as possible, like Jeanne mentioned, we have the website. Jeanne's also started our Facebook page, and we started a podcast as well. And part of that was also getting the word out in the media, because there was so much interest early on, especially after, the Pennsylvania grand jury report. And so here locally in the Washington, D.C. area, we did get some interest among the local press for the work that we were doing, and this sort of path forward that we were supporting. So we were thrilled to get some media coverage in the local press and the Washington Post and local TV stations as a way to help further the messaging. And that's really sort of where I see I can help out with all of this in trying to get more people to understand that there are folks like us, are women like us, people like us, who want to get this out as far and wide as possible. So I will share this documents of what we call calls to action, simple things that people can do, and actually among them is writing a letter to Cardinal Dolan. And Alice, I'm going to throw it back to you to talk a little bit more about this particular call to action, and just something that everybody can sort of rally around as another way of affecting some change and bringing some light to the 5 Theses.
Thanks, Cindy. Yeah. I think the important thing, the question that comes up again and again from the very beginning, our initial meeting is, yes, we vent, yes, we're frustrated, but what do we do? And the notion of having our voices, women's voices, again, we are the church, heard by the institutional church. It seems really wonderfully a wonderful opportunity right now today, since we're here under the auspices of Mary Magdalene's feast day. Just a few weeks ago, I think it was July 2nd, Cardinal Dolan of New York, in a blog post, referred to Mary Magdalene as a great sinner, perpetuating that myth that she is a prostitute. So as an action that we can all take, we women of the 5 Theses propose that we simply, on Wednesday, July 22nd, which is the feast of Mary Magdalene, that all of us simply write a note to the Cardinal to point out that that Mary Magdalene has been maligned, is not a prostitute, was not a great sinner, and that in perpetuating that myth, he continues to denigrate the role that women have played in the church. So I think we will be posting how you can contact the Cardinal. We have 2 proposals of what you might, how you might word an objection to his characterization of this great woman, you certainly should feel free to either add or subtract or write your own. We also have listed a few websites with the facts of the matter that the cardinal should probably know about. If you like, you can simply send him those websites and not say anything else. I think they speak for themselves. But it occurred to us again, this feels like a small gesture. As I said to the women, the 5 Theses, it feels like throwing pebbles at a monolith. But it's the way for women in the church to demand a reevaluation of the role that women have played in Christianity. As Dusty said from the beginning, the way Christ welcomed us as well as his male disciples into the fold. We need to demand a reevaluation. And this is a small gesture. All you have to do is wake up on Wednesday morning and send out an email. I suspect that if the cardinal on one day gets 60 or so emails saying, no, you're wrong, it might reach him.
So I want to, and thank you all for your wonderful words. And I'm turning this over now to Tony Mardugan.
Hi, I'm grateful for this opportunity, particularly when we talk about women of influence in the Catholic Church. This is an opportunity to talk to you about Mother Mary Lang and the Oblate Sisters of Providence. Mother Mary Lang and the Oblate Sisters of Providence, this was the first sustaining order of women of African descent in the United States. Mother Lang's story is a tremendous one. I'm considered to be what's called an oblate girl, belovedly, an oblate girl. Me and my 7 brothers and sisters were all raised in St. Pius Church, St. Pius Catholic School by the Oblate Sisters of Providence, paid for by my grandmother. Their charism influenced greatly my relationship with the Catholic Church and Jesus today. They literally saved my life. My grandmother, who was a firm believer in the Catholic faith, and the Oblates introduced and nurtured in each of us a deep relationship with Jesus. Mother Lang came to Baltimore as Elizabeth Clarice Lang, a free and educated woman of some financial means from Haiti. She recognized that African children could not read. So Elizabeth and Francis Valles opened a school in their home to educate children. At that time, African children were not allowed to be taught to read. In 1828, she also founded St. Francis Academy that still exists today on Chase Street in downtown Baltimore, in the area of the penitentiary. Elizabeth Clarice Yang, Teresa Duchemin, and Elizabeth Ann Seton all worshiped in Chapel Bass, which is in the basement of St. Mary's Seminary. Sister Pope used to call this holy ground. Whenever we used to take people there for pilgrimage, she would call it holy ground, because as you know, Elizabeth Seton founded the Sisters of Charity, Mother Mary Lang, the Oblate Sisters of Providence, and Teresa Duchemin, who was an oblate who went on to Monroe, Michigan, founded the Servant Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. A year after they founded the Oblate Sisters, July 2nd, 1929, 4 of them took their vows to consecrated life on George Street in Baltimore. There's a plaque there now to signify that. Elizabeth Lang's fervent love for God and Catholicism fueled her desire to enter into consecrated life. Her desire to reveal consecrated life to people of color was the same as Paul's to reveal Jesus to the Gentiles. Reverend Herbert Joubert, he was a Salpetian, recognized that desire and supported Elizabeth Lang in founding the Oblates and entering into consecrated life. I often think of her when I'm reminded of women's historical greatness and contribution to the church. Dr. Diane Batts-Morrow wrote in her book, People of Color and Religious at the Same Time, that Mother Lang's story is a tremendous story of Black female agency in the early 19th century. The Catholic Church played a major role in upholding and justifying the enslavement of Africans at that time. The critical imprint of Mother Lang's charism, identity, personality, attitude, and spirituality guided the Oblates of Providence through their founding and into their existence today. Mother Lang was virtuous and disciplined. Her pursuit of spiritual excellence for the order of the Oblates defied the stereotype viewed by the institutional church of African Americans. Mother Lang's executive skills of authority, example, and leadership fortified her religious community in dealing with trials, challenges, and rejections throughout the centuries. The charism of Providence will provide carried them far through many troubled times. Mother Lang and the Sisters of Providence endured much prejudice and racial hatred throughout their formation and their lives. In fact, their prayer for canonization for Mother Lang today reads, well, I'll come back to it. They endured public humiliation for being women of color in religious habits. They would be spit on, forced off the sidewalk when they walked down the street, and they were called to disband, particularly when their spiritual supporter and director, Father Gerbert, died. The then Archbishop Eggleston refused to send them another spiritual director. They were forced many times to walk down to St. Alphonsus Church and stood out in the cold, the snow, the rain, waiting for someone to give them spiritual sacraments, and often they did not receive them. When they were called to disband, they took in laundry. They worked in St. Mary's Seminary, where they actually said to the priests that asked them to come, they wanted to be clear that they wanted their separate quarters. They wanted to be able to refuse any services that they did not feel that they should be providing. Mother Lang often used her money to buy freedom for those that were enslaved. Dr. Morrow refers to these women as outsiders within the Catholic Church. Dr. Batts-Morrow accredits Mother Mary Lang in keeping Catholicism alive in the African American community in the 19th century, when the institutional Catholic Church, for the most part, accepted and practiced American racism, marginalized African Americans, and refused to ordain African American priests men to priesthood. Mother Lang's response to the call from God was strong and clear. They lived their charism. Providence will provide. And I can tell you, as I've worked with the Oblates, well, all my life, but particularly for the canonization of Mother Mary Lang, when things were really dim and dark, to hear them say, Providence will provide, and to see it provide was really enlightening for me. Dr. Batts-Morrow describes it as a special kind of humility. A humility whereas you cannot deny your own personhood or your own worth, and you're in constant relationship with God. Mother Lang lived believing that God's providence was greater than any misguided archdiocesan prelate. I think there's some words that I'd like to contribute just to describe Mother Lang and see how they cross over into our discussion today. Mother Lang was transformational. She was spirit-filled. She was a refugee. She was providential. She was a believer. She was a woman of movement. She trusted in God's divine providence. Mother Lang was virtuous at a time when they wanted to call women of color women without virtue. Mother Lang was called. She was called to consecrated life. She was committed. She was an evangelizer. She was a risk taker. She was marginalized. She was a Black female agent. Motherline was sanctified, a visionary. Motherline was well educated. She was a leader. She was hope-filled. She was forgiving. She was an educator. She was humble. As we heard in the readings this morning, she rebuked timidity. She was disciplined, faithful. She was influential. She was charismatic. Motherline was responsible. She was moral. When needed, she was domesticated. She was a career trainer. She was a nurse. The Oblate Sisters were very involved in nursing during the cholera epidemic of 1932. She was confident. The women of Oblate Sisters of Providence still exist today, and we're working very hard for the canonization of Mother Mary Lang. She's now venerable. Her cause is in Rome, and she's venerable. The school they founded continued to exist on Chase Street, St. Francis Academy, and they also have their early developmental center at the convent out on Gun Road in Catonsville. Okay, so I think Mother Lang's agency has a lot to contribute to this discussion when we talk about transformation. And I do think that God revealed himself in a very special way to those ladies at that kitchen table with their wine when they developed the 5 Theses. Thank you. Anne?
Thank you so much, Tony. That was magnificent. And I'm already almost starting to cry. So I'm going to try to move quickly before I get too choked up. I wanted to read a passage to you, but first to put it in context. Next month is the 100th anniversary of the Tennessee legislature's ratification of the 19th Amendment, which finally gave women across the country the right to vote. It took decades for that to happen. And a few months ago, I read this excellent book by a Maryland author. I think it's going to be, okay, it's The Woman's Hour. Read backwards and it's this. So The Woman's Hour by Elaine Weiss. And we'll be sending resources to you next week with a lot of these things that you can look up. So you don't have to take time to write notes. So it's one of the most readable and best books documenting the fight for women's suffrage. And what I especially liked about it is it really put it in context with racism at the time and the effect of racism and misogyny or all these things and how they were pitted against each other. So I finally understood that white women suffragists feared that racism could lose them the fight in the southern states. And oh, by the way, Maryland's legislature did not ratify the 19th Amendment. It sort of had to be dragged in kicking and screaming, you know, thanks to Tennessee. So winning the right to vote was not a passive endeavor, and no one understood that better than one of my personal heroes, the journalist Ida B. Wells. And so I'd like to read this passage to you that I think typifies a lot of what we know to be true. So Alice Paul and many of the other leading women suffragists were asking Ida B. Wells to kind of step back from visibility in 1913 during one of the marches. So when Ida B. Wells, the fearless, I'm reading from the Woman's Hour. When Ida B. Wells, the fearless Black journalist and activist who chronicled the epidemic of lynchings of Black men and who was forced to flee Memphis when her office was firebombed and her life threatened, wanted to join Alice Paul's suffrage march in Washington in March of 1913. When she hit the wall of convenient suffrage racism, Wells understood how essential it was for Black women to gain the ballot to protect their families, and she founded Chicago's Alpha Suffrage Club, the city's first club for Black women devoted to suffrage. But Alice Paul, that is, refused to allow her to march with the delegation of Illinois suffragists as an integrated contingent might upset white Southern participants. Wells was told to march at the back of the parade with the black stuffs. She would not be intimidated and refused to march at the rear. As the Illinois contingent passed by, Wells stepped from the sidewalk into the procession, defiantly marching shoulder to shoulder with her white comrades. So that was my favorite passage in this entire thick book. And so what that tells me is that if we as women, as people of color, allow ourselves to be outsiders and to wait for power to be given to us by the church, it'll just never happen. We have to step into the march like Ida B. Wells did and take leadership roles of all kinds to whatever you are called to do. It might be that you ask, if you belong to a parish, that you join the parish council, whether that's to run for election or to ask the pastor to appoint you. And if you feel the call to vocations, that to apply to whichever of those vocations you feel, whether it is to be a sister, to be a deacon, or even a priest. You'll get a no possibly, but apply again. And in the meantime, think about becoming a hospital chaplain, a spiritual director, a pastoral counselor. And later, I think we will have Liz McCloskey talk to you about the Women Preach organization, which is really just wonderful. So by doing this, we increase the number of women who are ready and prepared and are taking greater positions in the Catholic Church. And then the rest of us, we make our voices heard every chance we get.
And we've been getting lots of questions. So I think we're ready to start. Hope everyone's back. Thank you, those that are, and the questions keep coming too. So I'm going to try to field them as graciously as possible. The first question actually was addressed to me for something I commented on. Maureen Daly. Apparently I was distracting by saying that I was a recovering Catholic. And I guess I just need to explain. I've been a product of Catholic school since grammar school, high school, college, grad school. And I think as a younger child, I always felt that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough, good, you know, there was a lot of guilt, and I felt that, I don't know, I think that affects me even as an adult today. I'm never enough as a mother, as a woman, as a person. I think a lot of women struggle with that, but I think I'm grateful for my Catholic education, and I have strong faith. I have faith in God. But I think as the 5 Theses address, there are some issues at the Catholic Church. You know, in order to keep parishioners, in order to keep members, they need to address. I'm still a member of Cathedral of Mary Our Queen. But I'm happy here. And this, I think I never felt strong as a woman in the church. I didn't feel I had a role. And so I think this is what we're addressing today. Hopefully that didn't offend too many people, but I don't know. I wonder if anyone else has, I mean, I guess we all have some issues with the church. And I think that's why we're here to address it. I don't know, any comments on that? Anyone from our panel have anything to say about that?
Actually, I did understand, and there are times when you want to come back after being away for a while, need to be away for a while when you were so outraged by the injustices and beyond in the church. So I certainly understood the sentiment without having you to explain it, but thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And then we have a question. Or anyone else have a comment on that?
I just wanted to bring up, because I think this is important for today, that many of us obviously brought up in the Catholic Church, and now we're looking back and we're reevaluating what we were taught. And most of it we're clinging to. It means much to us. It is the substance of our spiritual lives, the prayers of the church, the ceremonies of the church, the theology of the church. But that doesn't mean we can't look back and realize mistakes were made. traditions that we may be very fond of may actually have done some damage, such as the all-male priesthood, such as the hierarchy not to be questioned, such as the elevation of the male hierarchy with tall hats and gold crops, and then being told to be humble and not to feel themselves above their flock, and yet we cover them with raiment. We're at a moment right now, I think, given the pandemic and given the renewed call for racial justice, that we as members of the church should celebrate and embrace. There's a confluence now of events that are forcing us to look at our past, our historical past and our religious past, and reevaluate and recognize that we may not have gotten the whole story. We may be holding on to traditions that are at heart insidious. And so I think the idea of a recovering Catholic is not someone who has rejected it all. I hear this a lot when I hear from readers that I've been damaged by the church, but I'm recovering from it. That is not the same as a reevaluation. And the events of the moment, I think, are calling so much, especially since so many of us have been away from church just because of the pandemic. There are a number of things, I think, if you want to say the Lord is at work, there are a number of things happening. And I think this is an ideal time for Catholics, recovering or otherwise, to realize that God is all about change. That creation is all about evolving. And this is a wonderful opportunity for the church to embrace change and reevaluation, and to recover from the misguidance of the past.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a question from Dusty to ask Liz McCloskey to please tell us about Women Preach.
Oh, yes. So some of the conversation was about what are we, and actually this maybe is a good segue from the recovery language, but what are we powerless over and what do we have power to change? And I think when we wrote the theses, we were all about knocking on the doors of power. And as many people have pointed out, we are the church. We already have power and we have a voice. And I think some of the reason honoring Mary Magdalene is such a great idea is because she had a voice. She was the first apostle. She was the first to preach the good news, to understand it and to run to the other apostles and preach it. And so this is something that some women have a gift for, is preaching. And so there's a really great website that Future Church kind of hosts, but it's really a separate entity called Catholic Women Preach. And for every Sunday, now they've gone 3 full liturgical years, 3 cycles of the lectionary. You can hear a woman preaching the gospel for that Sunday. And at this time where we're not in our churches, at least my church hasn't opened up yet, a lot of people have been doing home liturgies. And at Holy Trinity, the suggestion was, instead of streaming Mass, put something together and then listen to a sermon if you'd like, either the Jesuit who's preaching that day or Catholic Women Preach, which was a really nice invitation for people to hear those voices. I'm just thinking also today about John Lewis as we talk about voting rights. And one thing he used to say a lot was that you got to get in the way, and that he got in trouble, but it was good trouble and it was necessary trouble. And so some women are maybe getting in a little trouble by pursuing ordination, to the Catholic priesthood, even if that is not sanctioned by current bishops. And I think that's one way of living into the change we want to see, just responding to the call of priesthood, whether that is being granted or not. So those are two ways through Catholic women priests and Catholic women preach, which is two different things, where women are letting their voices be heard and serving in the way they feel called to serve. So I think I could probably put the website for Catholic Women Preach in the chat box for you.
Thank you so much, Liz. I have another question, and this is addressed to everyone on the panel. This is from Mary Tracy, and she asks, how do we avoid the pitfalls of mistaking grief for powerlessness? In other words, how do we avoid dwelling on power we don't have in order to use the power we do have? What a great question. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
I wonder if Cindy and Jeanne can talk about, since the power of their voices have helped us be heard.
Well, I maybe I'll chime in a little bit here. Actually, in Mass today, the priest, Father John, oh gosh, what's his last name, Alice?
Ensler. Father
Yes, Ensler, thank you. He was talking about, he was thanking I'll say I've been going to St. Bart's since we were allowed to start going back to Mass. And now this, I think, is the 4th week. And today there were probably more people than I've seen since the very beginning. I would say maybe there were 40. Whereas, early on we had maybe 20. And so he thanked people for coming, and he appreciated that we were there, and encouraged us to tell others that it is safe to go to church, that they're doing all the right things. But he also said that he thought as well that this was a time of change, and he spoke about really needing to open the doors to the Catholic Church. He told stories about people who've grown up in the Catholic Church, baptized, confirmed, and wanted to get married after being away, as young adults, going back to their home parish only to be told, no, you can't get married here because you haven't been at church in, 7 years, or to a couple that, recently moved into an area to go to a church and say, we would like to get married, and only to be told, no, you're not registered at the church. And he says, I couldn't disagree more with those rules and regulations that you have to be a member of the church, or you have to have had gone to the church. He says, there are, these are not sinners. These are people, we are all sinners, he said. And these are, people we need to welcome to the church. And all I could think about was, as listening to what he was saying, to where we are now with this discussion, that we want to be part of that welcoming. We want the church to be more open. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to speak with him afterwards, but I certainly will follow up with him. But I think, and I really don't know if I'm answering this question, but I think the power that we have, much like I think what Alex was saying earlier, or Dusty, somebody was saying earlier, that the power to be part of the church is in our hands. And whether it's being a member of the choir like I am, or being part of the liturgical committee or the church council, it is about being involved, because the more that we are involved, the more our voices will be heard. And that's where the power begins. You've got the grassroots and the grass tops. And I'm not part of the grass tops, but I can certainly be part of the grassroots. And I think somewhere we'll be able to find a place in the middle. So I think we are at a time when the church should be and can and should be open to more people. This is and by virtue of just seeing how few people are at church these days. And again, the pandemic has a lot to do with it, but still, I think we've all seen a reduction in the number of people attending. And like the introduction for me, it's about making the church relevant so that my daughters, who are both in their mid-20s, can come back to the church, because right now they have no desire. So the power's in our hands, I think.
I have some, I'd love to just pipe in just super quick on the grief question. And I read a really good book by a Fordham professor, Brian Massingale, called Racism or Racial Justice in the Catholic Church. And he talked about lament and how that is different than complaint or grief that is grief alone. Lament is this belief in the power of a vision that you know things can be different and you want things to be different. So you're recognizing the pain of exclusion or abuse, discrimination, anything, violence, recognizing that and lamenting because you have a vision of how it can be different. So I thought that was a good way of thinking about grief and action together.
And don't let your grief, acknowledge grief for grief and know where we're powerless. And the one thing I've wanted to do is it's one thing to complain to the Dolans, and we need to do that. We need to call them out, but it's also to amplify. It's really important that we amplify the voices of those who do have the power, who are doing it right in our eyes. There are bishops out there who are working along the border and who are amplifying the needs of the children and the families who are separated. And there are bishops out there who are promoting to the point of they may be getting in trouble and who are standing up for racial justice and who are standing up for women. And we need to encourage them and amplify them and let them know that we're with them. It must be a lonely battle sometimes when they're in those closed door rooms. Mm-hmm. So if you can do that, and I don't encourage Catholic Twitter, I'm a big social media person, and Catholic Twitter can be a really ugly place, but there are certain people that I follow and I try to encourage them that way. Does it help them? Does it help me to put a little heart sticker on a bishop's statement? Maybe, but it also gives me encouragement to know that there are leaders out there who are saying, have a vision of the church the way I want to see it.
Wonderful. I'm going to move on to another question from Ryan Sattler, and this is addressed to everyone in the panel. Is the Five Theses movement open to collaborating with other organizations, such as the Future Church and Women's Ordination Conference?
Liz, do you want to take
Alice,
that?
can you,
That's right up your alley.
Yeah. Well, the Five Theses says we're not necessarily, yes, we are on board to amplify their movements, but we're not a movement. And I think I always defer to Alice because she's the pro when it comes to, she's the word crafter. I tend to stumble, but that we're kind of a base, and that we would love to be a touch point for other movements, and we're there to support a movement. And it's, Alice, help me.
Yeah, I think the idea of a movement, I'm always referencing for the other people who join us with discussing the Five Theses, the Monty Python Life of Brian, where there's a wonderful scene of them quibbling over, are we the Palestinian Liberation Front or are we the People's Liberation Front of Palestine? And I'm always afraid that when you label something a movement, then there becomes a hierarchy of movements, and is your movement my movement? The Five Theses really, out of its beginnings, I think, is that sense of, it's the people of the church gathering. Yes, to grieve. Grief is there. Yes, to lament by giving, by giving words, by giving something concrete to our visions of what the church could be, and how we see it's missing the mark in fulfilling its promise. It's for all Catholics and Christians. The Five Theses is a way of talking about the fundamental changes, the outward signs of penance. For instance, number 3, which is simple living. which I have found gets more pushback from the clergy than anything else. And that is, you're not taking my hat. I'm not going to put down my crop. I really like those bright green vestments that I put on. The idea of the church perhaps indicating that it recognizes as an institution what a debasement has happened to it through the clergy abuse crisis. We are Catholics. That means that we understand outward signs. And yet the institutional church has made no consistent outward sign of penance. Taking a year to say every member of the clergy will only wear the simple black garb of a parish priest. No member of the clergy will be elevated above the people or above his fellow priest by this raiment. We'd laugh if any woman walked into a mass wearing a big golden green hat and sat in the pews wearing that. You would either think she was mad or she would be escorted out. So these simple matters of we are grieving together. Yes, we understand that the hierarchy, we understand that the clergy, we understand that all of us who are Catholics are grieving over the failings of our institution. We are, as Liz said, we are lamenting our sins, because all of us are a part of this. And yet we are hopeful and prayerful people. And we understand that our Creator works through change, works through evolution. We know that the words of Christ that was the old way, I am giving you a new way. And understanding that, so that's way more than a movement. And for any of us to be categorized, well, are you with the Five Theses folks, or are you with, no, we're Catholics, we're Christians, we see a better church. We see the church evolving as it should, and we simply want to add our voices to encourage that.
And just to quickly add on to that, as Alice and Jeanne said, that we don't call it a movement. Also, we're not actually an organization. And so we are actually in conversation with Future Church and Women's Ordination Conference and a bunch of diocesan groups that have sprung up that are reform groups, different coalitions. And so as opposed to being one among, we just want to give this these theses, this platform, these principles to all the organizations and all the groups that have formed as a groundwork, as a grounding, as something that all of Catholics who are seeking reform, no matter through what vehicle or organization or what they're focusing on, can agree on these 5 things. So I hope that clarifies. We've used them now as something to give to these groups. Take these 5 theses and work with them how you want to. And also we've used them to shine a light where people are already doing these things. So we often do promote a Future Church event or a Women's Ordination Conference or some other group. So sort of shining that light on where is this already happening, that women are in leadership or that we're praying for a Reformed Church.
And this question, I think Alice answered this, but I'm going to bring this anyway because I have a question to add on to this. This is from Gina Caruso. Should the male hierarchy of the church be re-evaluated? And what was discussed as women, I think that hierarchy should be restructured. To add on to that, I'm just curious, has there been a response from the male leaders of the church, from the priests, from the bishops, to what has been proposed, and how has that been received?
We have a variety of responses. Yeah, this is a good idea. No, I don't want to give up my fancy hat or my, there is interesting pushback from interesting people on different things. I think there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear from people who can make a difference, I think. So they're afraid, or, oh, it's a bother, or, oh, they'll get over this. But it's just a matter of being persistent. And I love the image of Ida B. Wells walking from the back to the front. That's got to be who we are. Alice,
Can I add something to that? When we posted the 5 Theses on the door of the Basilica, we all then went into Mass to participate in Mass. The bishops were not there, just to clarify. They were all kind of cloistered somewhere else. And for that whole conference, the bishops were very much removed from protesters or anybody around there. And so I don't know what they thought about the 5 Theses then. A few of us from St. Ignatius pitched in from the Women of the New Testament Ministry. At the time, by the way, I should say that I'm going to thank Candor Hisle and her mother, Melody Hisle. Melody founded the Women of the New Testament. And so we all kind of got together. We put our money into getting a room at the Marriott so that we could have some access, and we tried to talk with them. Liz was there too. Liz McCloskey was there. We tried to talk with them, and some of them were receptive. Some of them were like they could not get away from us fast enough, or they would mansplain things to us. It was both demoralizing and confirming to us that we have a lot of work to do, and that we might have to take a break to get over like just the frustration, but that we need to keep going. So there, I don't know what any formal response was. It doesn't sound like there was any, but I do want to add one thing in terms of who, I don't know if it was a person of the clergy or just a regular Catholic, and I think it was the latter. When Candor and I left the Mass early so that we could get to an event regarding the Conference of Catholic Bishops, we noticed that somebody had drawn a line through one of the theses, only one, and it was put women in positions of leadership in the church. So I found it interesting that was the one thing that the first person who could get to that and pull out their marker crossed that out. So I just wanted to let you know about that, because it was such a quick response that they were like, definitely not that. So I will let Alex go to, I think, the next question.
Yes, thank you, Anne. What a shame but it's not surprising. Women have been struggling in all areas of and not just our country, in the world for power. And this kind of continues this conversation a bit from Joan Sattler. Alice, thank you for your comments about the clerical robes. We have a new bishop who will become part of the Baltimore Archdiocese. Why don't we all contact Bishop-elect Bruce Lewandowski about this? He's an amazing person. I hope he will listen. So I wonder, is that something that is on the radar?
I think that's a wonderful suggestion. Again, I think just as with on Wednesday morning, sending a note to the Cardinal of New York, my sense from the clergy response that I have gotten when talking about the 5 Theses, it ranges from condescension to sincere interest, but underlying, and I would say most consistent, is a sense of we've been here and we've been doing this way for a long time, sweetheart, and you guys are going to get tired and go away. It's that those difficult women, those troublesome women, but they're busy. They have families to raise. They have other things they're doing. Let them talk, and it'll go away. And I think that raising our voices, even something as small as sending an email and saying, no, you got that wrong about Mary Magdalene, please stop perpetuating that. Yes, or saying, do you know about the 5 Theses? Welcome to the diocese. Here's an idea we had. Wouldn't it be lovely if one of your first acts is to announce that you will spend the year in simple clerical garb and help to model for Catholics preferential treatment for the poor, which is what we're supposed to be about, and humility and forgiveness and a vision for a reformed church the church that we love. To hear women's voices, even in just that persistent and small way, I think is the only way we finally get the full attention of the male hierarchy, because I really do think, and I understand they also have a lot of things on their minds. They really do think eventually will go away and things will proceed as they were.
I have a comment and question from Ellen Morrison. She says, Tony, thank you so much for your talk on the Oblate Sisters of Providence. It was extremely inspiring, and I know I'll be thinking about it for weeks. I want to learn more. So I guess, how does she learn more? What would you recommend, Tony?
Okay, so the Oblate Sisters of Providence, of course, still exists, and they are on Gun Road, 701 Gun Road in Catonsville, Maryland. That's 2128. They are rather aged. There are some younger oblates there that are in formation, but you know, they're very, with the COVID-19, they're not as accessible as they usually are. But you can certainly write to them. And certainly feel free to look them up. They have a Facebook page, the Oblate Sisters of Providence. And also they do this wonderful video about Happy, you know, the song Happy, where you can see them. And it's very, very nice to watch, to see them. So there's a lot to learn. Just look them up. Oblate Sisters of Providence, Mother Mary Lang, Google. And you get a lot.
And from Barbara Burry to everyone, by sitting in the pews, are we saying we are okay with the status quo?
I think the response has to be, we have to remember this is our church. This is our church. We are the church. We, the people sitting in the pews, are the church. Having said that, that doesn't mean that, again, we can't have our voices be heard in our own ways. One thing I absolutely love doing, and this is the adolescent iconoclast in me, I'm afraid. If you go to the website of Five Theses, you can print out these little postcards. When I go to Mass, especially if I'm visiting another city, I love taking some postcards and just putting them in the missalettes in my pew. If you leave them out, they will probably be removed. If you put them out where the church bulletin is, they probably aren't going to last if you put a pile of them. But if you just insert them in the missals up and down your pew, or maybe after Mass in a few other pews, with just the idea that the next person who takes out this missal and opens it up might see this. And what you're conveying is a fellow Catholic, someone who also was here in this church at Mass, is thinking and is not content with the way things are because of her presence. She is still present, but she's present and thinking and hoping for change. So it's just a little kind of underground, very sad. My kids get such a kick out of it when they go to Mass with me and I do this. They see the anti-war demonstrator from Vietnam in their mother, but just put them in. Just say, yes, this is us. We are the church, and we see the need for this, and we're still here.
I just have to comment, this worked for me as someone who doesn't attend church regularly and who is questioning, not my faith, but questioning the Catholic Church. This has made me feel more powerful and maybe want to come back and to join with this amazing group of women. I have another comment from Maureen Daly to everyone. Of the 5 points, 4 are pious aspirations: be transparent, listen to survivors, live simply, pray. Only 1 is real action: ordain women. Any comments on that?
I think that's probably the clearest and largest action. I think, however, there's a lot of work to be done to address the others. Full transparency. I mean, the Catholic Church is even still trying to use the statute of limitations to cover up. That's still going on. That has not been addressed fully. So transparency is not been achieved. So demanding that is demanding an action. The survivors' voices. One of the things we proposed, as Liz read, was to offer a space in diocesan newspapers for survivors to tell their stories. Again, this is part of the Church's recognition of what went wrong. It's part of penance, which we understand. Action is penance, not just saying we're sorry this happened. Just before we gathered, when we first met and began to develop this, I was getting the dining room ready for everybody to come. And I came across a diocesan newspaper from the Washington Diocese from some years back. Why I had it, why I kept it, I had no idea. It was one of those, did my kids get it? Were there pictures in there? Did they get a mention in here? Why do I still have this old diocesan paper? And I opened it up, and it was when Cardinal McCarrick had just come to Washington. And it was his lovely column, which the Cardinal gets to do in every issue of the diocesan newspaper. And he was talking about unpacking his books because he had just arrived, and it was very charming and very lovely. And he said something about inviting people into his room, which, reading it in light of what was happened in 2018, was a little creepy. But on the opposite page of this old diocesan newspaper was a notice about the women who were ordained as Catholic priests on the Danube, because they didn't want to do it within any jurisdiction, who were excommunicated. These two things were existing side by side and in a diocesan newspaper. This man who we had elevated, who we were reading his columns for inspiration, not knowing, although the hierarchy did, who he was and how he was behaving, and women looking for a voice in the church and being excommunicated side by side. So this again, we have voices and we have access to having our voices heard. Diocesan newspapers are one of them. And if for the church to say, we want to hear from the survivors, we will print your stories and we will acknowledge your grief and the damage that we've done, is an action that the church can take.
Thank you, Alice. Here's another question from Mary Tracy to all. Based on when I was a cardinal, when I asked Cardinal George of Chicago why they were shutting down dialogue about women's ordination, he responded that they did not have the authority to make such a change. He added that he personally believed that a lack of authority was his only real reservation, that he knew many women with better relevant skills such as preaching. What is a good response to the question of who has this kind of authority to make such a change?
Liz, do you want to take that as
well, I think that's why.
Yeah.
It was a papal, and now I can't remember the term, how John Paul II shut down conversation. It was an act he took, and it's an act that another pope can undo, which is why the language was of at least the American bishops. We really were not asking them to do much, but just as a body, all say, Pope Francis, the USCCB, we would like you to reverse this so that we can legally have this conversation, reopen the conversation. That cardinal is just correct on that small point that the authority to do that lies with the Pope, because it was a papal something.
But they have no authority to talk about it. I mean, who's going to be brave enough to ask for forgiveness instead of ask for permission? You know, we need to keep talking about it. And when they shut us down, we have to find ways to support each other to keep talking about it. It's the only way it's going to get done. We have to keep moving from the back of the line.
There's also the point that we mentioned in the 5 Theses, and that is that a woman can be made a cardinal. You do not have to be an ordained priest to be a cardinal. The Pope could appoint a woman as a cardinal. Nothing to stop that. I mentioned this to our dear Cardinal Dolan, and right away he said to me, well, you know, we thought about doing that for Mother Teresa. The Pope wanted to make her a cardinal, and she, in her modesty, said, oh, no, don't do that. Don't elevate me in that way. And I just said to him, okay, well, that was one woman. Why don't you have another? You know, so that's it. That would be a powerful sign that does not need the complex Vatican approval that opening up the priesthood to women would require. So our voices, again, the clamor of women's voices, say, do something, toss us a bone, show us something, show us your hearing. A woman.
Yeah, I would also encourage people to look to the German church and the Austrian church and some of the movements in Ireland, because internationally there's talk and there's movement. There's the people in Germany have a little more guts to stand up and talk about these things. So look through that. I don't have anything specific to recommend, but there's a little more information going, a little more dialogue going on over in Germany. And
I would also,
yeah.
I would also just add, you know, I wonder, you know, the alternative to, you know, not doing something within our own church, not seeing the church move forward, is leaving. And, you know, whether we want to do that as individuals, or whether the church is willing to allow people to leave the church because it's inflexible and it's unwelcoming in our eyes. You know, that's, I mean, unfortunately, you know, that is that is definitely an alternative, not one that I would like to see, but that is something that they risk having or having done. And I think that that's something that they need to think about, and something that we can let them know. I mean, you know, listen, people are going to leave the church. They're not going to come back. And what will the church become in the future? I mean, that's a very real concern. That's something that Father John mentioned in Mass today. I mean, he didn't say that the church was in jeopardy, but he was very happy to see people finally coming back to church, and encouraged us to get more people to come. And you wonder why.
And I just wanted to comment, someone had asked about, can this be recorded? We are recording this. I hope I had mentioned that at the beginning. We have been recording this, and the video will be sent to all participants via email within a week. And you can also forward along to other friends who are maybe having some issues with the church and would like to get involved. There's so many questions. I'm going to try to get to everybody. Deidre asked about what the bishop's response was to the 5 Theses. Have we heard a response from any of the bishops?
Start with the letter we got from the Vatican.
I think, yeah, so we did get some responses from individual bishops. Somebody asked, I think earlier in the chat, did we send it to all the bishops? And we tried, but it was a cumbersome process. But in the end, we did get some actual hard copy letters to people. We sent one to the papal preacher who was conducting the retreat that bishops made, whenever that was, out in Chicago at Mundelein Seminary. And he's an Italian Franciscan, and he did write back we had a little dialogue going, and I'll have to look back to see the exact wording, but he did say, this is good. This is good stuff. Keep at it. Let your voice be heard. And it was very encouraging. And there were certainly individual bishops who said, yeah, there's nothing here that I don't agree with. As a whole body, they stand behind this notion that they can't make statements as a whole body, that they're just a collection of individual bishops. Yeah, we know that they could.
And next up, I have a question from Ryan Sadler to everyone. Should more women and men leave their parishes and join and support the RCWP? It would help the RCWP become more visible in this movement.
I think that if people leave the church, that all that will be left are the people who want to bring it back to the 1950s. You're going to have all of the traditionalists. And Alice, you had some very interesting interactions with women who were literally shaking at the thought of ordaining women. Mm-hmm. That there's a tradition, it's a small faction. I like to think of them as the Amish Catholics, because and if that's their avenue to sanctity, if that's how they feel, wearing a veil to church helps them feel closer to God. I'm not going to judge that, but they're really opposed, and they really don't have a good argument to why, other than this is what they were taught. I don't know, Alice, help us. That was a great story that you have.
The Catholic Imagination Conference out at Loyola in Chicago, and in my remarks, I had brought up the 5 Theses, and as was demonstrated by the line drawn through the one thesis on the door of the cathedral in Baltimore. After my remarks, and I went through all 5 of them, that was the idea of women being ordained was the dynamite in the room among the people there, and quite a few of the younger people there. And you hear all this saying there were no women at the Last Supper, and the ontological argument that women can have babies and men can be priests, and somehow those 2 things are related. But there was the thing that really sort of opened my eyes. There was tremendous fear. The people, and they were mostly women, who were objecting to women's ordination were full of fear that the church would become something that they didn't recognize, that God forbid lesbians might be priests, that they would lose the sense of looking to power and being told what to do, and a tremendous sense of nostalgia. There's no doubt about that. And again, I think that's why this is such an important time to begin to recognize that the histories we were told, the traditions that we've been clinging to, they may not have harmed us, but they have harmed others. To believe, for instance, that that the Civil War was the war of northern aggression, sitting around with your buddies and saying that it might not harm you, but think of how much harm it has done to others. And I think this idea of hanging on to traditions because we have fond memories of them from our childhoods, from our families, all that's well and good, but this is a time to reevaluate language and history and stories we've been told, and to question them for the greater good, for the understanding that this may have worked really well for me, but it's harmed others. And I think that's what there's so much fear about. The other thing I heard so much was, if we have women priests, we're going to look just like the Protestants. And we don't want that.
We have only about a few minutes before we need to wrap things up. I think this conversation could keep going. I can either pose out another question, or I'm wondering, does anyone from the group, from the panel, want to speak up or add something else? I didn't want to miss something that hasn't been covered. Anyone have any comments, or I can go on with one final question. Is it not true that there are some church officials who have said that they would prefer a church with fewer members who have more orthodox beliefs? Get less money. I hate to say that.
Well, I think Jeanne pointed that out. I think that that's very much the case. I think actually people like Steve Bannon have advocated for that.
Steve Bannon, there's a very wealthy group of people, men, and who are putting a lot of money behind establishing a Catholic orthodoxy. There are universities that were started, and different organizations within the church that have schools in our area and that are promoting much more orthodoxy. And I think I put it in the comments, I think it's called the Benedict option, where the church will necessarily have to become smaller and to retain its orthodoxy. But what's orthodoxy? I mean, if they're looking back, the church is 2,000 years old. We've got to look at the entirety of the history of the church. But people remember what they want to remember.
I just have a quick thought about the Roman Catholic women priests and the question about should we leave our parishes and celebrate in that way. And I think everybody makes their own choice, but I'll just say what I've been doing is I go to those masses and I make it really clear at my parish that I do. And especially in this COVID time, it's even easier to attend on Zoom, places that are not necessarily in the DC area. And so for me, the hybrid of I'm not leaving, I am a woman who's staying, gosh darn it, and I'm a woman who supports women priests, and I'm going to go to those masses and celebrate them. And I don't see any conflict there, and I don't see that I'm leaving the church because I do that. Because I do think, back to that point, that there are some who would say, goodbye. You just go and do your thing. You're no longer part of us. I'm saying, no, this is our church. And this is, I'm just going to accept that these women are priests. And this is a mass, and I'm going to go to that mass. And I think the more people do that and who are not afraid to say it, that might be good. So.
Thank you all for your wonderful questions and comments to our amazing panel. Unfortunately, I'm sorry I didn't get to any of your questions or some of your questions, but we're going to, maybe as Catholics, one thing we know how to do is pray. And so we're going to now bring it over to Dennis McGlone, who is going to share the prayer for reformation of the church. And that will be, and there it is. So thank you, or here it comes. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Hi, thank you very much. I feel like I'm part of the men's auxiliary to the women of the New Testament. My wife, Allison, is a devoted member. This prayer is, the idea is that this would be part of the prayer of the faithful during Mass. Let us pray that from this community of gathered people will arise a new church, a church that protects the abused and the marginalized, ministering to all in search of healing, a church that strives continually to overcome every type of discrimination, whether social or cultural, whether based on gender or race or color or social condition or sexual orientation or language or religion, in order to pave the way for a new future of joy and hope. We pray to the Lord. Amen.
You would hear our prayer.
I would like to say that first of all, thank you, Dennis. We welcome men, we need men. You have been such a stalwart supporter of us, as has our pastor, Father Jim Casciati. And our hope when we put this together, well, actually, what we wanted to come out of it was some hope, because we women of the New Testament were pretty despondent. And the second thing we wanted was to come away with concrete actions that we can do that will help to relieve our despair, knowing that we are taking action. And from this, it has been an embarrassment of riches. We have so many ideas. There's has to be something for everyone. So I am so grateful to our panel. They were amazing, and you have helped our ministry to keep on keeping on. So thank you very much. And thank you, of course, to Alex, our moderator, and our technical person, Liz Locavara. We could not have done it without you. So thank you.
Thank you, women of the New Testament. Can I extend an invitation to any of you to some sessions that the Women Who Stay at Holy Trinity are sponsoring? The founder of Future Church will be speaking to us tomorrow night. And then the following week, Sean Copeland, about another brave African-American woman who founded an order, the Sister of the Holy Family, Henrietta Delisle in New Orleans. Sean Copeland's written a book about her. And I would love to invite you all to that, as well as our Mary Magdalene Feast Day prayer service. So I'll put a little link in the chat box, so you can email me or Dusty to get some more information. But I'd love to just keep these conversations going and the relationships across different parishes and cities. I'd love to continue to strengthen them.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. God bless all. Thank you so much. Thank you to our amazing panel. Thank you all for who participated. Please stay safe. And I'll just want to end with someone put in the comments, maybe I should change the word to looking at it as I'm a discovering Catholic. And I really love that. So thank you for that suggestion, because I think we all are discovering more about our faith and about what we can do and how much power women can have in the church. So thank you all. Be safe. Hope to see you all in person one day. Okay, take care.